And I don't know, I don't feel like I'm a real comics person. Like that's the only thing I know. It's the only thing I breathe. But even so, I think beyond imposter syndrome, when I'm doing things, I'm always, not sure if I'm breaking things because it's on purpose, which sometimes it is, or if I'm breaking things because I don't know how to do them right in the first place.
Hey, thanks for listening. Welcome to the season 15 finale. Yeah, that's what this is. And I think couldn't ask for a more enjoyable person to share it with. And that's Ben Caldwell this week. If you're not familiar with Ben's work, hit pause and search out his stuff. Welcome back if you did your search for Ben Caldwell art. He's freaking amazing. I stumbled onto him in the artist alley of New York Comic Con probably 10 years ago. Like I just knew the second I saw his work. I'm like, oh, this is someone whom I'm just going to pay attention to for as long as I can. Ben, as we talk, we have a few overlapping people in the creative industry that we love dearly and we think the most of. And he is that talent who gets to work with some of the best, and deservedly. I think Ben typifies a lot of my reasons for doing the podcast for all these years. Ben talks about this in the episode, how he is compelled to make the things that he makes. And it's very hard to modify that in so many ways, not just for him, but for anybody who is possessed by inspiration. Whether you're making films, comics, writing novels, that's the thing that drives everyone. It's that fine line between madness and inspiration. That kind of stuff drives me in my personal work, and it drives me on the podcast, not only in the conversations, but to make the thing. Because like everything that we do, unless someone is hiring us and they're putting it out, it is like shouting into the void. It is just making a thing and hoping that it connects with people. And I absolutely am grateful for all the people who do connect with the podcast and who do say, hey, thanks for this, or this meant something to me. Talking to past guests, and it is an ongoing conversation. I feel privileged to get to talk to creators like Ben and the 240 plus that I've had the privilege to talk with for all these years. And the crazy thing is the list is so long of people I still want to talk with. And there are so many people who I want to have come back. So I don't ever really see this being a thing I would run out of doing. And woe be it if I start talking to novelists. I don't know. I don't know how I would do it. I so hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did having the time with Ben. He is so fun to talk with. He is so open and so generous. And what a sharp mind to match his Papermate pencil. I think I got the right make. So you'll get the joke when we get later in this. Without further ado, sayonara season 15, and this is me with Ben Caldwell.
I always have art stuff with me. It's my security blanket.
Understand. Gotta have the thing that makes you happy.
It's also my employment blanket, but yeah.
I guess you could sew together a whole bunch of your drawings into a nice quilt.
It's very close to that, actually. Yeah, I'll have like 3 sketchbooks with me at a restaurant. My wife's just like, no, not really what I was.
Pick a book.
Yeah, not really what book. Because what if I want to draw something in one of the books and I have the other book? That's crazy.
I know. It's so strange because I mean I have not had sketchbook practice, in decades now, but I so remember that whole. Oh, this sketchbook is for this. This sketchbook is for this. Like there was this sort of siloing of what the intention. I still have like, this goes back to art school. This book is just for copies of comic book drawings.
Yeah.
I'm only maybe a quarter of it of a way to it. I bought this, back when Koenig art supply still existed.
Yeah, these are all yeah, the red one is for Purge Theory, the blue one is for a bunch of toy designs I want to do, and the black one is Dare Detectives. I've got like 3 or 4 each of these. I go through
Yeah.
like a year. Yeah, it's one of those things where it sounds impressive, but when you look what I had to show for it, it's not really. So
I get it. I think I vacillate between that whole, okay, I have a thing for everything, or I just have a giant hopper that I put everything in, and then I have to go and be sort of like a forensic detective and pull everything out.
yeah, I'm at the point where I scan everything to at this point. Um, I've lost too many sketchbooks, or I'll forget where something is, and then I find like a
Hmm.
mountain of drawings like a year later, which is cool because hey, free drawings, but not cool because
Right.
I didn't even realize they were missing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not great.
So that's something that I wonder about, like with your process. I'm guessing you're drawing on copy paper, and
It's fancy. It's fancy copy paper. It's this special Xerox digital expressions. When
okay,
I used to work at Toy Biz, um, we'd use that for printing, for final printing, and I found that paper was amazing for inking because it was really smooth but not
okay,
too smooth. And so I started using it for that, and then later I realized it was amazing for pencils. And yeah, I mean, I use a crappy. I don't have one here, but I don't even. This isn't even going to be like broadcast as an image, as video, right? Just audio.
right. No,
Yeah, I use a Papermate #2 mechanical pencils. You can buy like
okay,
800 for
sure.
$1. Yeah, but that paper works great for it. Unfortunately, they changed the Papermate pencil formula, and the new
This is the big thing.
no, it's I thought I was going insane, and then I saw I think Adam Savage did a whole video on it. I
Yep,
was like, thank God it's not just. I mean, I'm
it's
going
not you.
insane just for different reasons. So yeah, actually for Father's Day, my wife and my son like found a bunch of old ones at like a local thrift shop. So I've got enough for the next, I don't know, I've got about 180 of them. So that's enough for like a couple of weeks for me.
Yeah, I think you
Yeah.
make it through at least until like, Thanksgiving.
Yeah. It's, so I have the new ones, and those are the ones I'll use for like writing notes or stuff, or my son wants broken. So he
Okay.
gets those. But for the real work, it's got to be the old ones.
It's funny. I wrote about that and talked about it in a recent episode about like tools and like how important they are, and the way we will customize our tools to work for our, you know, process.
Right.
And like, I mean, but I was doing the mechanical lead holders, those 2.5
Yes.
millimeter ones. And then I just I went back to the old Ticonderoga, like for the last few years of me being a regular penciler. I was like, this is fine. I don't need it. Like
I mean,
I was like, why am I so special?
the Black Warrior, I think it's Murado Black Warrior is great too. Honestly, for me, it was a little bit of a devolution in tools where I started using Papermate because I would travel a lot, and or just when I draw physically very, very fast.
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
having to stop and sharpen a pencil, or having to bring pencil sharpeners with you, when you're traveling, or just, anything that interrupts that flow. So for me, it was really just convenience with that pencil more than quality original Papermate. But,
Yeah.
I got used to it as a tool. But I mean, those things also, the tools that support you can also hold you back. So I found sometimes, you're so used to making a certain sort of mark simply because of the tool you're using, that I
Hmm.
was doing visual development a year or two ago where I just started doing it with these big blocky markers, and Conte crayons. And I mean, the results were horrible because I'm not really good at that. But it was great to help me push, like try and look for different shapes, or just, draw much
Hmm.
larger than I really will, to change the muscles, to kind of break out again, not just tools, but even like the muscle memory that helps you,
Yeah.
with your structuring or your style. It can also keep you locked in a very specific take. And I like to kind of move my style and my approach around. And I'm always frustrated that I don't do it more. So, yep.
Yeah. No, that goes back to art. College for me was, I remember I was plateauing in a drawing class, and I've said it before, but the teacher came by, and you knew when the figure drawing teacher was like, you're totally sucking. Like, remember that
Yeah.
horrible feeling of like, they were like, they wouldn't stop and look at your stuff. They would just walk right past.
Yeah,
And you're like,
nothing
oh
to do
man,
about that.
and he just reached in my box and like pulled something out and was like, here, just use this. And he knew that I just needed to try to like challenge my brain, figure something out.
Yeah, that's also yeah, it's also a constant source of frustration there. Yeah, something that bugs me is
Yeah.
in college I would try all sorts of you have the luxury, I mean you're already paying for the tools and everything too, but luxury of trying all sorts of different materials or approaches. And when I got out, and especially when doing comics, a lot of times, of course, you're working much more towards a focused goal. You got to get pages done and so on. And
Hmm.
and so there were a lot of techniques and tools and so on that I tried in college once. And I'm like, this is so cool. I'm going to try this so much in the future. And I'm actually hoping after I finish my current work to kind of take a moment to really jump onto some of those things. Um,
Yeah.
Especially because that again is part of the larger issue of when you're working so hard towards end goals, you can get this fear of failure where, you have to get it right. And that actually can be counterproductive because
Hmm.
you've got it, both for speed and quality. You just have to jump in and know that, not every individual page is going to be fantastic. Maybe not even every individual book is going to be fantastic, but it's,
Yeah.
the overall buildup um, over time that really is sort of the, I don't want to say legacy, that sounds fancy, but the residue of your work is, not just one thing or another. It's the entire body of what you're doing. Yeah. Anyway, working on that.
Yeah, and I think you touched on that, the idea that that deadline, that end, that goal also kind of keeps us in a box
Mm,
because we have to hit this timeline. And to be in that timeline, it doesn't afford like thinking about it too much. Like you
nope.
have to like go off of this body of experience to say, okay, well, this is the best way to do it. And I have only, I have 5 minutes to come up with the solution.
Right.
Boom.
And that's well, it's interesting also because on sort of a performance level, in some ways that's comparable to say, uh, you know, uh, a Major League Baseball hitter at bat, as the ball's
Hmm.
coming at him, he's not thinking and processing, oh, it's this kind of ball, I should hit it the same. There's just literally not the time for that. What they've
Right.
done though is they've practiced for that and encountered that a million times, so they've built up this subconscious model that they don't have to think about. And so they're just kind of performing what they've already trained for. And to a certain
Hmm.
extent, when you're doing comic pages, that ends up being the case too, um, where you can have all the theories and ideas, but that's where it's just you have to have integrated that or ingested that, processed that inside yourself, so that when you're doing the comic, you can just sort of um, kind of let that get onto the page with minimal fuss. I know one of the issues I have with that, I'm super ADD, so I will put a lot of thought ahead of time, and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to use this sort of style. I really want to push, this sort of color scheme, and really think through, the importance of thematically doing this visually, or if I'm doing the story as well, how to really make sure I'm doing this or that with the character to get the maximum effect on the audience. Um,
Right.
but what I've planned ahead for and what actually makes it on the papers sometimes is not quite the same, unless you're going back and checking over and over. um yeah, I did a Dracula comic years and years ago, and I realized there were a couple of pages, a couple of panels, there's I think 3 panels where the character's not on the panel because I messed it up and was like, oh, I'll come back and nope. So to this day there'll be like Jonathan Harker sees something and is terrified, but you don't know what he sees because that panel's just like, I'm not sure what's there.
Your mind can't comprehend the terror that he saw. Like it's
That's
just
that's true. That is the official stance of the publisher, and I'm supporting them. Um,
yeah, no, that's
I,
it's
then
great
then there's
commentary.
then there's the even more disturbing question of, does anyone even notice? Like did it even matter? So
I know. I find myself burning through comics sometimes and I'm like, I'm not even looking at the artwork sometimes. And
yeah,
I'm like, what am I doing? Like, and it's because sometimes I'm like, I have to get this read because if I don't get this read, then I won't be able to talk to somebody or so, whatever the
right.
thing is. And that's so I'm like, okay, wait, hold on. What am I looking at here? Um, so you touched on something that I want to get into because you were saying you're choosing styles and like when I look at your work and looked at your work for years, I go, it's this it's this wonderful synthesis of what I would call like, Western animation
Mm.
mixed with Eastern anime and this, sort of superhero aesthetic, but not traditional, but kind of older sense of superheroes. And then just kind of like a dollop of whipped cream on top, I feel like I see this sort of heavy influence of the predominantly earlier Rockwell children faces.
Um,
Does that does
well, that's funny
are you
because
tracking?
Rockwell was actually a huge influence on me. My grandparents had an amazing collection of art books, which actually was a huge influence on me overall. And I love the rock. One of the things I love about the Rockwell ones, I think there were two things about them. One, which I think is pretty obvious to everyone, is each one is a story. Like you can look at any one of his pictures, you don't even have to try. You can instantly come up with an entire story
Yeah.
for all the characters, what they're doing, and I've always loved that. I mean, even riding the subway in New York City, I just like looking at people and making up whole stories, and he really lends himself to that. And so that was something that um, always always informed me in what I was trying to do, on a gut level. But the other thing about it, which I think also is reflected in what I love with Western animation, for example, and also comics, and I guess especially I don't know about necessarily classic comics in terms of '60s stylers or that, but without a lot of hatching with relatively clean lines. What I liked about that, which I like about Rockwell, is also there's a certain I don't know if abstraction is the right word, but it's really putting information down. And Rockwell, I mean, obviously he's a master painter. He knew how to handle, structure, lighting, and all that. Having done so, he always lit things to give the clearest information.
Hmm.
Um, and he, like when he had drama, it was drama in the character's expressions. It was drama in the composition. He didn't use intensive lighting for drama. Um, the way you'd see in a lot of like say 19th century
Sure.
romantic painting type, just destroyed my entire credibility of art history. But anyway, um, there was a certain intent for clarity, for visual clarity and structural clarity with that went beyond any sort of over reliant fidelity on exact lighting. In terms of how lighting would realistically work, so much as how it works to get the information across the audience, get a reaction from them. And that was something I
Yeah.
loved with animation as a kid. With the I guess now you call it like sort of that cell shade look.
Hmm.
That flat and is again, I love the fantastical nature, and that's a whole separate conversation. And I did love um, the aesthetic push and pull you could do with it that you didn't find in live action or in a lot of more conventional illustration. But another thing I loved is it did also have that visual clarity of giving you that information. Um, and as opposed to, this is a weird, and this is an attack, but as opposed to say someone like Boris Vallejo, who obviously an amazing illustrator, but one where
Hmm.
like characters like half disappear into mist here and there, and there's a sort of vagueness at times about form and structure, and
Yeah.
what is where in it, which is part of what he does. That's not intended as criticism for him, but that's a look that at times I love it, but in general I love things that have a much clearer sense. Or there's a lot of comic art that has that sort of ephemeral quality that again I can love it as art, but and appreciate the quality of it. But I've always have loved comic art that does have that sense of visual play, and it can be detailed,
Hmm.
but and it kind of gets in the larger idea of cartooning to me, like when you say the word cartooning, where the broad outlines are as dead simple, as clean and clear, and I guess as intentional as possible. And there can be a lot of details, but the thing is, the details have to support that larger, simpler structure and
Right.
reinforce it. Or even when they undercut it, they deliberately undercut it because they're making you question what you're looking at. And the same thing is true of stories. I tend to love stories that structurally are very, very simple, but do have those details. So, you do see a lot of work that's, again, in terms of story and art, that's much more detail oriented, but the details tend to obscure the larger outlines. And
Yeah.
again, this isn't a judgment call in terms of quality, but for what I'm doing, I prefer that more. I don't even know if simple is quite the description, because it's not simple. Like I mean, even Jim Lee, he did Count Chocula, Box art, he
Hmm.
said that was really hard for him because, if you draw an image that I draw a face that's got 100 lines and one of them's off, no one's going to notice.
Right.
If you do a face that's got 3 lines and one of them's off, you're going to notice. So it brings its own challenges, but I tend, and again, it could be the ADD. I tend to love boiling things down to their most essential elements
Hmm.
and then really amplifying those. And so, yeah, back to the original point, Rockwell, it might be overlooked by some people because of, they dismiss it as Americana, or because the subject matter tends to be, a girl changing her tire of her car in front of her window at house, or a family man skipping out on Sunday church while his family walks out the door looking in disdain. So the subject matter might seem to people to be, I don't know, unremarkable, uh, but yeah, his approach always does boil things down to those essentials and sells them to you in terms of his color and his composition, and is really remarkable. I mean, you can look at someone like, say, NC Wyeth, and he does the same thing, only obviously with a very different and much more bombastic approach, and more
Hmm.
dramatic lighting, for example.
No,
But
way more. Yeah.
it's still got that. And it's funny because they both also have that very, which is another thing I love, this stagey quality. They both, you could
Totally.
easily see either one's image being reenacted as a real life tableau of people standing on a platform and rigging and lighting it so it looks just like
Hmm.
those images, and you can walk by and watch it. They always have that quality to them, and I love this, the theatrical operatic quality to communication that both of them had. Which, by the way, both of those are reasons why Frank Miller's Dark Knight was such a huge influence on me as a kid, and why I loved it so much. Um,
Really.
yeah, I know we're kind of jumping to a different part of the conversation, but obviously I'm working on a project with him right now, which is a spin off of
Yeah.
The Dark Knight. And one of the fun things about it for me was I didn't read that book when it first came out
Okay.
because everyone else would talk about it and what they loved about it, and what they loved about how grim it was, how realistic and gritty, and how Batman was cool because he would kill people. And the way they were describing it was all things; those were all things to me that were just uninteresting as a
Hmm.
treatment for this bizarre, larger than life character. And then I think I was actually at the shop buying something else and was mentioning it to the owner, comic owner. He's like, "Yeah, I don't like that book. It's too cartoony." And I was like, "Wait, what?" So I think it was when the graphic novel came out, like a year or two later,
Hmm.
the combined 200-page book, and I read it, and it was not at all what I was expecting because it certainly is dark, but it
Hmm.
is insanely like theatrical, is operatic. Um, it's self-aware in a way that think people don't always realize. Batman is weirder and more human than you would think, um,
Mm.
on a moral and emotional level, and there's a lot of satire. Um, so yeah, working on the new project with Frank Miller and being able to tap into some of those elements. I mean, that's been very cool. And talking with him about that, it was very satisfying. But yeah, that was a huge influence on me. How bizarre and cartoony, not just the art and the style, but just the entire conceit of the thing. Beyond the Darkness, it
Yeah.
was so weird.
It's interesting because it's very much a much bigger brush of a storytelling, or a storytelling brush that he used for that than he did for Daredevil.
Right.
Daredevil was, so close, so personal, but for this thing, he had to really pull back and tell a much bigger tale with, I guess, just more scope.
And with a lot of economy too, because he didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at what he was able to do in each 45-page unit, I mean, granted, each panel is the size of a postage stamp, and there's 40 a page, which I respect the hell out of. I love that approach too. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, he really used an economy there, and it's interesting to see. I have to wonder. We talked about it a little bit. Obviously, I can't speak for him, and I don't know how, but how much of that he was just like, I want to kind of just try things and
Hmm.
see what sticks to the wall, and in some cases just do things I know people don't want to see because I'm that person and I want to do that. And again, I really respect that. And the results were pretty great.
It's such a crazy period. We had that in Watchmen kind of landing real close
Yeah.
to one another, and these touch point pieces that have sort of steered the comic industry for like nearly the last 40 years.
Yes.
It's kind of insane. And those guys had an amazing huge body of work leading up to this point. It
Right.
wasn't they just sort of like appeared and like, I'm going to break comics.
Right.
They weren't doing this kind of this one-off thing. Um,
Well, I gotta say, but just quick side, that always makes me
yeah,
nervous with my own work because, like you just said, they were able to break comics because they kind of knew what comics were to start with.
yeah.
And I don't know, I don't feel like I'm a real comics person. Like that's the only thing I know. It's the only
Hmm.
thing I breathe. But even so, um, I think beyond imposter syndrome, when I'm doing things, I'm always, not sure if I'm breaking things because it's on purpose, which sometimes it is, or if I'm breaking things because I don't know how to do them right in the first place.
Well, I mean, guess that's the art of creative discovery, you know, is that stepping into the terra incognita. You don't
Right.
know. So you're kind of out there kind of going, well, what if, okay, I'm going to try this. And I think often what we look at as, brilliance or genius or whatever is someone just chucking a dart out there with with whatever
Right.
tool they're using.
I think the timing is also everything because if
Mm.
those books had come out 5 years earlier or 5 years later, they wouldn't have had that sort of impact. In terms of,
It was happening. So I think about it a lot. Like those guys grew up in a time when they were young, it shifted from being the sort of the standard practice of what was happening in the early to mid 60s. And then you get your Steranko's, Neil Adams, you get these people coming in and kind of changing, I guess, evolving whatever that model
right.
was. Then you get the 70s where you start getting these people coming into the business and these, we call them the young Turks, and they're just going, hey, give me Moon Knight, give me this. And
Right.
they started taking this stuff and really turning nothing properties into something, to the point where what I grew up on was that stuff. So I was, 12-ish years old, when all these books, Moon Knight and the X-Men with John Byrne and,
Right.
like all this stuff was happening. And I was like, oh my God, like comics are great, but these guys were able to say, cool, we've done this and we know how to do this. Let me try something further. And that's where it is. And for us, we stand there on those giants going, okay, well, what can we do to make that, to make our
Right.
mark?
And they also, I feel like there was a dialogue with the audience in terms of, I probably was the same age as you reading when those things were coming out. Um, but there were a lot of old, like it was the first time you were really starting to get, more and more older readers. I know obviously with Marvel in the 60s, college age and so on. But we're getting more of an actual market of comic fans who are comic fans, not just, 8 to 12-year-old kids who are sort of,
Yeah.
drifting in and out of the comics market, but people who are there to stay. And I feel like um, they nurtured that sort of an audience, but also they were sort of reacting to that audience. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I know in my case, I feel like I totally like what I do and whatever audience there is for it. There probably is somewhere. I'm not sure I've ever quite managed to to successfully connect.
To line up with that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about those guys too. They also were getting external pressure because at that time, that's when the American indie market started happening.
right,
So, hey, you could leave here and go do something for somebody else. Chances are they'll kill you in the morning, but you still get a chance to like try something different.
right,
And I think that's where, that older audience was like, oh, what, like this thing called Nexus is pretty interesting. It's not straight up
right.
superhero action, even though there's a dude in tights. Um,
I mean, that was also a great flowering of just all sorts. Like again, I grew up on tons of stuff that was coming out that was non superhero at that time.
mhm.
That wasn't really around before. I mean, like ElfQuest
Yeah.
was a huge influence, and that was something I think Epic tried to kind of cash in on that later by republishing those, but those were done independently. The stuff Comico was doing.
Hmm.
Um, like you said, there was that huge anime wave that I probably a lot of younger people don't entirely realize. I feel like every generation feels like theirs is the first to discover something, and there's a certain fun of that. But yeah, there was that
Hmm.
huge explosive wave of anime in the well, first in the 70s really, but then in the 80s, mid 80s, and comic publishers starting to bring in, like I think that's when Studio Proteus and Viz got their start. I
Yeah.
remember getting, all of the, Appleseed, Pineapple Army area,
Yeah, and like Art Adams did covers for those things
unbelievable.
because
Those were an incredible influence. Yeah, those were amazing.
oh, they were huge. Like, it
So,
was, because like I mean, I for me, I got when I was there when Longshot started. I'm
oh
like,
my
who is
gosh.
this? What is this?
Yes.
And it was because it wasn't. Listen, I love superheroes, totally love them. But I look back, I'm like, the books that really hit me weren't superhero books. They were very different books
Right.
that somebody was trying, and I count Longshot high up in that
Yep.
thing. It was just such a different type of story.
Like Power Pack. I mean,
Oh yeah.
that was the other thing is, so my taste in comics, I'd go every Saturday morning, I get like $1 for my allowance, whatever. And I'd go to the 7-Eleven and buy comics and, just go back to my home and just read them. And also, for someone without a lot of disposable income, it was a pretty cheap form of entertainment. And it was great.
Hmm.
But yeah, I liked, I guess, really safe kind of stuff like Spider-Man. I loved the Spider-Man stories. Actually, I loved him because he was a loser and his story is actually really dark. But they still
Hmm.
had that sort of like that cartoony clarity I was talking about. So I liked a couple titles like that. But yeah, most of the ones I liked were like Conan or um, Star Wars, which was like this green talking rabbit with a laser gun. What's not
Yeah.
to like? And so yeah, when Longshot came out, it was amazing because it was, I don't know how to put it. It was science fiction, but it wasn't the kind of typical science fiction at that time. It was also, I got to say, two of the biggest influences on me from that period, in terms of characters, were almost everyone in Longshot, but particularly Mojo, but then
Hmm.
also White Rabbit from Spider-Man Team Up, I think 180 or something, which was right around the same time. Those
Oh
characters were
wow.
both
Okay.
decades I mean, I talk about both of them, but I mean, Mojo, the idea of this villain who creates artificial entertainment where people die and then broadcasts
Yeah.
it for entertainment. Um,
Yeah. Decades ahead of time.
right. And
Ahead of
even,
its time.
there was this, he was almost like this, um, almost like a Zack Snyder or Michael Bay director in one of them who would film these crazy, like obvious Mad Max ripoffs, but he'd be like, special effects are for pussies,
Uh
stunt
huh.
doubles are for idiots. I'm going to have
Right.
real people flying real jetpacks into a real explosion. It's going to be fantastic. Um,
Yep.
so, and again, there was that satirical. I think I like that too because growing up and looking at the world around me and saying, "Wow, this is pretty stupid." So,
Yeah.
yeah, having people actually engage with that, it was hilarious. But then with the White Rabbit, and I know this might sound crazy, but it's an amazing example of a certain kind of story because it's not Shakespeare, but D- J.M. DeMatteis, is that how you say his name? Am I ruining it? Yeah.
Sure.
So he told this complete story, beginning to end. All of the characters have all of the arcs and development you need. They're all interesting. They appear on stage, they do their thing, and in the end, everyone ends up where they're supposed to be, how they're supposed to be, and
Hmm.
all kind of almost like fabricated out of nothing, whole cloth made out of nothing, and then it just all disintegrates at the end into nothing again. It's perfect. Um, but yeah, again, it's this incredibly wealthy criminal who is bored, so she commits crime for the spectacle of it. Which I mean, that's more terrifying than almost. I mean, obviously, it's not played quite so terrifying in a kid's one shot from 1983 or 1981,
Yeah.
but the implications are pretty terrifying. What she would do, and I feel like and again, she was just way ahead of her time. She was like basically an influencer, with these
Mhm.
hired goons.
Yeah.
It's sort of thing that now she'd do the same thing, only she would make sure to record it
Sure. It would be
for
on
live
TikTok.
stream it for an audience. So
Yeah.
it was way ahead of its time, and I feel like people have tried to bring her back since then and tried to make her serious, and she's making fun of something in society that isn't serious. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure that trying to make her cool. I'm not sure solves anything, or making her a butt of jokes. Both kind of miss the mark of how she's this personification of an entire element of the modern world, which has just
Hmm.
become more pervasive and more relevant, as time has gone on.
Yeah. It sort of seems like Deadpool kind of hopped into that category
Yes,
where she sort of like, sort of cleared a field and then he built a
right.
house.
And I'm sure that's
Uh-huh.
how Marvel sees it too. They definitely feel like White Rabbit was the winner.
Oh,
That
yeah.
but no, she yeah, in a perfect world, she and She-Hulk would go to Japan and fight ninjas and
Why not,
pure
right?
pure comic magic. Um, but yeah,
Totally.
so in the actually in the 80s growing up, I thought pop culture and comics culture were going to go in kind of a different direction because there were things like that were getting slightly more insane. There was Long Shot, there was Power Pack,
Mhm,
which I loved because even as a kid, I loved that it was other kids that they'd fight
mhm.
crime, but they would also have to go to school. Um, I love that I didn't have to know anything about them or how that. I loved connected universes, but I also loved that I could just read it.
Yeah.
And it was this is weird, but it had like like it was the sort of thing you could see being a Steven Spielberg movie. You know what I mean? With these kids moving to a new
Yeah.
town or whatever, and they're dealing
Uh-huh.
with family issues, and they discover some alien, and all of a sudden. So it had
They got
that sort of
powers.
yeah, it had that
Yep.
open quality. I mean, it still in the end did have the what is it accoutrement. That's not you know what I mean, the accessories of
Oh, yeah.
superhero-ness in
Yeah.
terms of, they had the costumes, they had the code names, but having
Mhm,
said that, it was still much more yeah, or there was a whole I think one shot of the X-Men I vaguely remember where Morlocks kidnapped some kids and took them down to the storm drains. And then the idea that who was like Magic or someone was babysitting them, and they're just like rescuing these kids again, which is, it
yeah.
feels like something that could be a movie. And there were a lot like that I thought were really interesting. And then there were also Atari Force. Oh man, I loved Atari Force.
Dude,
Obviously, the
it's
art
the
speaks for itself, but I mean,
it is
yes, some of the characters and things might feel like ripped from the Star Wars headlines or whatever. But having said
mhm,
that, it was amazing, and again, it felt like it was just doing its thing. And I also have to say, you know, Dart was this black lady in charge. X Men had this black
mhm.
lady in charge who would cut a motherfucker in the stomach just to
Yep.
prove who's in pot. So I thought there was going to be, I don't know, I thought the 80s and comics was going to explode into this really weird, interesting direction. And in some ways it did, but in certain other ways it kind of didn't. And I think it slowly kind of came back to some of those things. But I know as a kid, I thought there was a very clear trajectory, or even things like what
Yeah.
was it, the new universe, where it was just like, I don't
Mhm.
know, we're going to try something new. Let's see what happens. Like, that was pretty cool. So,
It was very gutsy. I think that they maybe it was just the decline of all the indies that happened between like 85 to 90.
mm,
There was a there
yeah,
we had a whole bunch of companies, and then we had Dark Horse
yeah,
and that was it. And I think there was this sort of decline. So at that point, Marvel and DC had their hands on the tiller. DC had a huge success with Crisis,
mm,
and I think that really made them go like, I think people really like our characters. Like they
right.
like the whole, I don't know, because Crisis happened right after the Dark Knight.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah,
getting a Who's comic or whatever or something for the upcoming year, and it had Watchmen, Dark Knight, Crisis, and I had no idea what the hell any of that was.
right.
Um, so yeah, and then
Yeah,
I
it
actually
was
got the Wonder Woman, the reboot Wonder Woman, and I was so confused because I knew she'd been around forever, and I was like, this is the origin story, and there was also a lot more rape in it than I was really looking for as a 13-year-old. So I'm not sure how I felt about that,
hmm.
but yeah,
Yeah,
that was interesting, but it was cool how they just were willing. And I wonder like how often this comes out of desperation in a good way with, Marvel in the 60s. The same thing where they're just not getting to where they need to go and they feel like, they're not on the right track and they're like, I don't know, just try something new. And
yeah.
you know, that doesn't always work, but when it does, it's pretty spectacular.
I think that's a current struggle both of those companies have to face is that because they have larger corporate interests based on the IPs that they hold,
Right.
they don't have that space and luxury to go like, well, this book isn't selling. Let's give that writer the Hail Mary,
Right.
thing that they keep yelling about. They go, let's just cancel the book and focus our attention on something else that's selling.
I mean, I think
Um,
so. I mean, I can say I don't think there's anything controversial to say about this, but I've been complaining about some of that for years, as have a lot of people. I remember, like when I worked at Toy Biz, I used to have this discussion when I was first trying to get work for Marvel and later DC. Like over 20 years ago, we had this conversation of, these companies have all these resources. Why don't they take a chance on new things? But that's kind of the problem to a certain extent is, if some schmo is making something in their basement and they get it wrong, they can just throw it in the garbage and start all over again. If a giant
Hmm.
corporation does it, you have to get all these approvals. People's jobs are on the line in a different way. So
Yep.
it can be harder for, a major. It took me a long time to kind of process that too, but it can be harder for them. And I know, and there's a weird thing, but for example, people complained for years, and I was certainly someone who was concerned about this myself. Again, because the stuff I grew up on. Why aren't there more comics that are, for younger audience that feature younger characters,
Hmm.
this and that? You know, there's a whole group of people known as girls who read, and
Huh.
they have money.
Wait, hold on. Let me write this
Yeah,
down.
I mean, because again, this is nothing new, but like, even
Yeah.
20 years ago, you'd go into Barnes Noble and there'd be tons of manga even then. And there's a whole separate conversation about,
Sure.
the pipeline of how that works. But that had tons of, teens and teen girls
Hmm.
and middle grade girls reading them. And it seemed kind of a shame to, I mean, when I had my daughters, there was no Wonder Woman content for them.
Right.
The comics just were not age appropriate for them.
Hmm.
Not in terms of, I don't know, sex or anything like that, but just they were a writing style and art style that was not going to appeal to, a middle grade
To young
reader.
people.
Right. And
Yeah.
there was no movies back then or anything. I had to show them She-Ra. I had to get all the old She-Ra cartoons, and that was their Wonder
Cool.
Woman for a long time. So so I know that's a conversation it's a concern I brought up a lot of times, and I know a lot of other people did too. But having said that, um, companies did try that. I know DC did try multiple times, and I don't know the details of how they tried each template. Like they did the whole manga line, I think around 2010 or so.
Hmm.
Um, that I don't think worked in the end. So I don't know what the details were of their thought planning, or whether they could have done X or Y better, or any of those things. But I do know it is the sort of thing. I mean, I have all sorts of random opinions, but in
Sure.
terms of anything intelligent to say about that, I do have to say that companies have tried over the years, and it's not, oh, you could push them or give them a hard time, but it's also not quite always as easy as it might seem. Like for me,
Right. It's super tough for them because they have an audience that expects something.
right,
And what they expect is sort of like when you go to McDonald's, you expect everything to be within a specific parameter of flavor and experience.
right,
And I think for the big two, that's the same condition. And then, as you said, there are people's jobs online. So
right,
if somebody it goes to bat and puts their neck out for this thing, it affects their career, their livelihood, their
yep,
family to a level, and not just an individual. There could be a whole bunch of people in this chain, and it's tough. Brett Lewis, I don't know if you know Brett, the writer, and Brett and I in the early 2000s, maybe late 90s, I can't remember, but we like pitched to Marvel, like, why don't we, do like a quarterly manga sized anthology of female character stories
mm,
and have it so, people buy these things and just read these, 8-page long adventure stories, and we could have printed it, it doesn't have to be super fancy. It could just be really fun, and let these things come out every quarter.
yeah. I pitched around 2001, actually, a fantasy version of the X-Men, like a crazy over the top epic X-Men
Hmm.
fantasy. And then also a Shield versus Hydra, but like a younger. And this sounds like so trite and like Hollywood speak for this, but that was like teen versions of these characters. That was younger
Yeah.
skewing, more like mecha skewing, like all sorts of. Because also at the time I was still working for a toy company, and
Hmm.
again I'd have the same conversations at the toy company where I'm like, you guys own the rights to say Shield and Hydra. Why aren't you making an entire line of like crazy Hydra megabots, and Shield has shark, like mechanical sharks that can transform into submarines? Like why aren't you
Hmm.
doing, like, you own this stuff, you can do whatever you want.
Right.
And again, I can't speak to what their thought process was, and it was their money on the line. But um but I'd pitched those to Marvel, and there was actually an editor who had me do a bunch of development for it, and then that editor was gone, and no one else was interested, which is not a comment on the quality of my work,
Nope.
or the correctness of anyone's decisions, but just
No.
again a reminder that there are all
So
sorts of
many
factors that come
circumstances.
in and out of play.
Yeah.
That I'm sure any writer or any artist could tell you their own experiences like that. And I mean, again, that also kind of, it's not entirely comparable, but something like The Watchmen or Dark Knight. It's just a reminder of how many things happen to line up just the right way at the right time and right place, or those might not have happened, not because the creators involved didn't have the talent, but just because so many variables have to line up. So it's kind of
Yeah.
amazing things like that, actually. And also, by the way, I mean, DC since then, I haven't really been paying attention to Marvel, but I know DC's been doing, of course, a lot of YA stuff, and they did Big Barda and
Hmm.
Wonder Woman and Amethyst, all of which I was pitching at one point. So I'm kind of sad that that didn't happen, but I'm really glad it did happen because those are fantastic characters, and I'm really excited
Yeah.
that there's whole new generations that can read them and enjoy them, and hopefully read more comics and make comics their own.
I think we struggle when we're when we're creating things and we're out there and we're pitching stuff saying, hey, especially if you are somewhat within the structure of the organization, you have the luxury of getting into the office and talking to the people and saying, hey, we really think we should,
Mm,
this would be great. This would be great. And even when it doesn't hit, I don't think we have often the sensibility of saying, you know what, if I'm thinking this, chances are somebody else is thinking something similar. And
right,
eventually it gets around. So, it's, so the love of Big Barda, while I wanted to do Big Barda stories back in the 90s, nobody wanted to see Big Barda story in the 90s.
right,
But now you fast forward 20 years and then that's totally fine and cool. And
right.
I think that's great because eventually someone was like, I want to do Big Barda story. And the other person on the other side of the desk was like, well, yeah, we should definitely do a Big Barda
Right.
story. And then you have
And I mean,
cool
I hate to
stuff.
put it in this again in this, but it's like all this IP that's just sitting there gathering dust. And again,
Sure.
you never know. Um, like the latest Big Barda comic, for example, just because it's relatively recent, so it's on my mind, that Ngozi did, is like it will probably sell well as a comic. I don't know. I'm assuming it probably will sell well as a comic. Looks great, but more importantly, like that's just something that Warner Brothers, these Hollywood companies are always looking for new
Hmm.
versions or new content that's not based on anything that's based on existing. Like they have their own formula for that, but all of a sudden they've got this whole extra option when they want to make a certain kind of movie or TV series, and that's
Yeah.
great. And I mean, uh, studios are so used to using comics as their sort of incubator or test. So having those new comics with these characters that they already own, and new takes on not just stylistically, but generationally, just means more opportunities for these companies to reach new audiences or just play with these characters, these
Yeah.
ideas that are there to play with. So I just wanted to give a shout out because I know DC certainly made several attempts, and this last one, they did a bunch of books that seem to be people seem to be happy with. I don't pay attention to anything. I just sit in my hole and draw pages. So I
Yeah.
don't know, but I just like vaguely it seems like it's like those kind of books are there more now than they were in the past and are
Yeah. The fact
resonating
that
more
they let you
successfully.
out is just it's a surprise to me. I'm
And they
shocked to see you in the wild.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm actually kind of drawing off on the side, but,
Yeah.
um,
Good. Good.
yeah. I
You have
mean,
four, you have 20 digits. You should be utilizing them at least
I usually
all
am,
the
yeah.
time. Yeah.
No, even yeah, it's kinda sad. Even when I'm sitting there watching a show with my wife, at bedtime, I'm drawing,
Yeah.
drawing, same drawing over and over till I get it right.
How did the jump from, brand adjacent Toy Biz to drawing for Marvel happen for you?
Well, I got the job at Toy Biz more or less accidentally. Um,
Okay. You were just hanging out.
well, I was actually looking for work doing, product packaging. And I knew someone at Toy Biz in the packaging department, so I sent some samples, and she's like, "We actually already have a company we exclusively blah blah blah, but the toy design department needs a toy designer. Can you design toys? Do you know how to do that?" And of course, I was like, "Yes,
Of course.
yes, I do." So I went and met, and so I went to the store, looked up a bunch of Toy Biz toys, see what kind of stuff they made. Went home, whipped up a quick portfolio. A couple of days later, I was in their office. Um, and I was not qualified, so they didn't hire me. But then a couple months later, they brought me back. Um, I'm going to be honest with you. I think it's because no actual toy designer would accept the salary they were offering.
Mm.
But the joke was on them because before that, I worked in children's publishing, and it paid so much worse that that Toy Biz thought they were getting me for a steal, and I knew I was taking them for a ride. So it was happy. It was a happy meeting of everybody.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm the person I am. So when I was at Toy Biz, when I'd be on my lunch break, I'd make up my own stupid nonsense. Or I was on lunch break and I drew my own cartoony Dare Detectives characters and I put them up on the wall. And one day, one of the VPs was walking by and saw that. I was like, "Yeah, I like that kid's style. Put him on that new project." And they were doing a pitch to do toys for this random children's book property called Harry Potter, which
Hmm.
wasn't movies at the time. The third book had just
Yeah.
come out, um, but it had become enough of a phenomena that Toys wanted to do. And I guess a lot of amazing designers and artists in our company, much more qualified than me, but they definitely were bringing a super heroic angle to everything because
Hmm.
the toys we did were all you know, Spider-Man or Stone Cold Steve Austin. And that, working on that stuff all the time leaves a mark on what you're doing. Whereas I had more of a children's book background and a cartoonier take. So they ended up putting me on that as one of the designers. And that was fun. Just reading those books and drawing whatever the hell I wanted for like 3 weeks was pretty fantastic. Um,
Yeah.
so I was always kind of off doing my own thing when I could get away with it, or trying to convince them, like I said, why don't you do a Shield versus Hydra? And so, of course, I'd go and redesign the whole Marvel universe in a cartoony style, what I think they should look like as minifigs, that kind of thing. Um, and at one point, one of the one of those pitches, studios, companies like, forget it, like that costs money to cast all new material, and it's too much of a risk and this and that. So someone said, like Marvel's right upstairs. Why don't you take that stuff to them? So I did, and there was an editor, a great editor who liked it, and I did a bunch of development for that. But then he ended up leaving, and no one at Marvel was even remotely interested. And so at that point, it was just I'd been trying to get in comics ever since I was in college, but it was always kind
Hmm.
of through these side ways of, oh, I know a guy who knows a guy, or oh, maybe if I do this and that, someone will notice magically. But at that point, my wife is like, you need just be a big boy, put your stuff together, and go to editors in a normal setting. Is there a
Yeah.
place you can meet a bunch of editors or whatever? And I said, well, there's a San Diego Comic Con. And so, yeah, I went and brought all my stuff and I showed it to everyone, and everyone thought it was too girly and too cartoony, um, and could not hire me,
Yeah.
except for Dark Horse was interested in one of my own properties, the Dare Detectives. And then one of the VPs at DC, Richard Bruning, he looked at my stuff and he's like, I love it. I just don't know what the hell we would hire you
Do with
for.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's like, I mean, if he's like, I mean, he was very nice, but he's like, I don't know, man. If something comes up, I mean, fingers crossed, but I don't know. And then a month
Hmm.
or two later, he contacted me. Yeah, actually, it was a brilliant idea. Because, with a lot of these characters, the money isn't from the comics. The money is not even necessarily from the movies or cartoons. The money's from like the lunch boxes.
Yeah.
Right.
Licensing.
So normally to get to that point, you have to actually make a movie or make a cartoon, and that of course takes a lot of time and money. So he was like, why don't we just do develop a couple of styles as if it was for a cartoon, for example, and then just go straight to
Hmm.
licensing with it, that are distinct looks, they're very cool, distinct takes on the characters. So it was great. So for, again, about a month, my job was just to redesign the entire DC universe kind of the way I thought it, like in my own cartoony style, which is
Right.
ridiculously amazing opportunity. And I think it kind of ruined me psychologically for later comics jobs because I still kind of approach everything like that. So yeah, and
What do you mean? What do you mean you wanted to look this way?
yeah, I mean, they'll
Right.
be like, "Oh, well, Superman's S has to look a certain way," and I'm like, "I know you think that that's what's going to happen." No, actually, I did learn how to draw Superman's S exactly on point. Um, but no, but I also that didn't end up becoming a thing, which it would have been interesting to see, regardless of what artist they used. And there are a
Hmm.
lot of amazing artists out there who could have done that. But it would have been really interesting to see how that worked because I think that's still a fantastic idea. Um, but then he passed my work on to Steve Corte and Charlie Kochman in
Kochman.
Kochman.
Charlie Kochman's
Yes,
he's the secret
Sauce.
he's the secret cog
Yes,
of so much great
in
stuff
so
that's
many
happened in
different
the
in so
industry.
many different places. Yes,
It's unbelievable.
and so yeah, they had me. I think first Steve had me do a Super Friends calendar, which was
Hmm.
amazing because you wanted to look like that style, and which was hard for me because it was not my normal style really. And also, but I was kind of dismissive of the Super Friends because you see the cartoon and like their eyes aren't really colored in and they look all weird
Hmm.
and janky and everything. But they just sent me, I don't know, like 500-600 pages worth of Alex Toth designs, the original stuff.
And you were in.
And I was like, all right. And so I was, and it was still hard. It was hard for a long time.
Yeah.
Actually, what I ended up doing is at a certain point, I ended up tracing his stuff just
Okay.
to get that kind of muscle memory and feel for the
Hmm.
breakdown. And it was only after I'd
Totally.
done that that I was able to actually sit down and kind of draw them. And I'm sure I still didn't do them justice, but and then I was passed on to Charlie, who had me do a Wonder Woman kid series. And again, that kind of ruined me because it was Wonder Woman, it wasn't part of continuity,
Hmm.
and the writer for it, Nina Jaffe, did a great job again, not trying to make it fit into a particular um, storyline or anything as part of the larger DC universe. So that was amazing. And then one day Charlie's like, "Yeah, this guy Mark Chiarello here at DC,
Who?
he's the art director. He saw your stuff on my desk and he wants to meet you, and you should take that meeting." And yeah,
Yeah.
and so again, Mark Chiarello is also the secret sauce in a lot of stuff that people
Totally.
love. Um, and yeah, he likes cartoony. He likes that cartoony nonsense, so he gave me work here and there, um,
He likes good stuff, is what he likes.
and my stuff. But even then, like
Yeah.
I was saying, how like a lot of things have to kind of come together. I would
Hmm.
show him my stuff every once in a while. Again, he would find things for me here and there, but for the most part, it's like I love this. I'm not sure what we can put this bullshit
Yeah.
in. Um, and one day I was in the city meeting a children's book editor for a different project, and I was only in the city so often, so I was like, "Hey, Mark, I'm in the city. Do you want to meet up?" And he's like, "All right, I guess I have time for lunch. I don't have time for like an actual meeting." So we had lunch and we're chatting. And he, outside of anything else, he's a very smart guy. He's a very interesting guy. It's always fantastic talking to him. Doesn't matter what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I wasn't even specifically looking for a job, just kind of like staying in touch. And he's like, "Oh, what do you got going on now?" And I always have a folder of art or folders of art in my
Hmm.
bag. Like I said, it's like a security blanket of I always have stuff with me to work on. And I was like, well, here, Mr. Chiarello, this is what I have right now. And he was going through it. And there happened to be a folder that was all Wonder Woman stuff, just because I was never satisfied with the work I did in those children's books. And I wanted to think
Hmm.
about more like, oh, what would Paradise Island actually look like? Also, I'm a big history and anthropology uh,
Right.
nerd. So, like, what would this steppes, semi nomadic steppes tribe look like if they've been living for a few thousand islands on this tropical island? What
Hmm.
kind of clothing would they wear? How would they develop? The many reasons why they wouldn't look like classical Greeks. That's a whole different thing. And so he was looking through that, and it was also a younger version of Wonder Woman than people usually do. And that was because that's the children's books had been Wonder Woman has just become Wonder Woman. She's just gone out in the world. So that was kind
Yeah.
of how I was used to seeing it. It's like, these are great. By the way, I just had a project approved this morning called Wednesday Funnies, and it's going to be an anthology of a bunch of comic artists. And he listed off the people who he was planning to put in. It's like, wow, that's a pretty great list. And he said, do you want to do something for that? And I was like, yeah, okay, sure, I will. I'll take whatever character those other guys want because they're all really amazing. And he's like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What character do you want? So yeah, so I was like looking at my folder of Wonder Woman stuff, and I'm like, Wonder Woman. He's like, all right, do whatever you want, make it big, make it crazy. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I was at a point in my career which is funny looking back. I guess it would have been 2008 when that happened because the book came out the
Hmm.
following year, 2009. And I was basically ready to move out of comics at that point, or mainstream comics,
Yeah.
because
Wow.
no one wanted my stuff. It was too girly, it was too cartoony, it was too manga. Although, of course, any actual consumer of manga would be like, no, this bullshit, this isn't manga enough. So, it was one of those things where it's nobody else's fault or anything, but I just felt like I was hitting my head against the wall, and was going to just kind of shift back into children's books where I'd been before and doing commercial art. Um, and so I was like, this is probably the first and last time I'll really be allowed to do a superhero type comic with an actual superhero character. And then I'm never getting hired again, so I might as well just go crazy. And so I did. And everyone hated it, but Mark Chiarello liked it. And he's the one who signed my paychecks. So that was good enough for me.
That's all that
That's
matters.
all that matters. So So yeah, that was again like the right things coming together at the right
Yeah.
time and place. Because I had a bunch of friends who are creators who are like amazingly talented, successful, who'd be like, "Wow, it's so cool you got in the project. Like, how did you even swing that? How did?" I'm like, "I didn't do anything. We had lunch at an
We had
Italian
lunch.
restaurant." So I
You
mean,
were
I
being
guess you could make.
you were just being aloof.
I mean, well, yes. I mean, I guess there is a plan where you can just make random lunch dates with various editors and happen to accidentally have a bunch of drawings on hand that happen to coincide with the project they've just been greenlit for. You
Mhm.
can take that approach. I don't know how scalable or replicable that is, but it's an option.
It is. I mean, it's like the million monkeys with typewriters
Yes.
philosophy. Just it's the million lunches philosophy. Um, your doctor doesn't approve of it, but
No, I mean, is it financially viable? Not really, but it worked in that one.
especially if you're paying,
But that's also the whole thing about like how to break into comics and everyone wants to know the secret and everybody kind of does it differently. So
it's always different.
yeah, I'm not even sure I actually have broken into comics, but to the limited degree that I have, it's a lot of, or even, I mean, even for the Carrie Kelly comic I'm doing, it was timing. I was trying to convince them to let me do an Amethyst graphic novel. And
Okay.
I put together like a huge chunk of a pitch for it. And Dan DiDio came up to me at, what is, Baltimore
Okay.
Comic Con. And I was like, "Oh, hey, Mr. DiDio, you want to see mine?" And that is how I talk to people because it's hilarious.
Here's my folder.
Right. I was also kind of scared of him because he did Wednesday Comics too, and we were at a signing together. I never met him before. I just knew him as the emperor of DC Comics, and everyone was afraid of him and
Mm.
everything. And he was sitting next to me signing stuff, and he turned to me. He's like, "Oh, hey, you're the one who did the Wonder Woman comic, right?" I was like, "Yes, sir, Mr. Dio." He's like, "Yeah, Mark Chiarell likes that cartoony stuff." And he went back to signing, and I was like, "Oh, am I?
Ouch.
I didn't get yelled at, but I didn't not get yelled at." So yeah, he's
Oh,
cool though. He's very nice. But yeah, so I was always nervous about seeing him. But then he came up and he's like, "Oh, hey, what's going on with your stuff?" And I showed him the Emma stuff. He's like, "Oh, that's cool. Frank Miller is thinking of doing a Carrie Kelly comic aimed at younger audience, and it's a young female character, so it's." And I think I'm just really stupid because I was like, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea. You should definitely do that." There are a lot of artists that are really qualified for that. There's so many great cartoony artists and this and that. And he's like,
here's a couple of their business
"Yeah, here's a
cards.
website for someone who's not me." So we're talking, it's like, "Yeah, maybe you could give me some samples of your stuff, like this sort of stuff, and I could show it to him so he could see kind of what's." Maybe he was being dodgy. Maybe that's why I was missing the
Uh-huh.
hints. But he was like, "Yeah, maybe you can show me. I can show him your stuff so we can see what kind of options there are for that." Because he doesn't do tons of stuff that's on in that direction. And I was like, "Yeah, yes, sir, Mr. DiDio." So I put some other stuff together and sent it to him. And then a week later, he's like, "Oh, Frank loved your stuff, so let me know when you can start this comic." And I was like, "Oh, I guess I'm hired." But
Yeah.
but that was also, I think, perfect timing because you have me, this glorious idiot who draws this, stuff that's too cartoony, too girly, or whatever. And they can't give me a real job because what if no one buys it? And then Frank Miller wants to do a comic with, this 13, 14-year-old girl, and they need someone who fits that. So, two birds, one stone. Like, how bad can I mess it up? Frank Miller's writing it. People are going to buy it. Doesn't matter.
Totally.
So, yes. But then I might actually be good at it. They don't know. So for them,
Yeah,
that was some
that
good math.
that that will be their downfall,
No,
is that you actually produce something wonderful.
yeah, no. So they were very smart about that. So because then get me off their back about how about doing more books for girls. So yeah,
Right. Well,
that worked.
listen, once again, 51% of the population, you can't go wrong.
Yes.
Kind of pay attention to it. But you also got, so I want to ask a few questions about that project because, it is kind of a marquee thing, but you also were able to, I guess, grandfather yourself in with one of our favorite people in the world as your editor.
Yes, Marie.
Yes.
Is amazing. Marie I feel like multiple people have told me I might have even gotten an audio recording breaking it down. I still can't remember if it's Javins or Javins. I think it's Javins.
It, okay.
You think it's Javins? All right,
It's
Marie.
cool.
Marie.
Yeah.
Right? Marie. You can't mess with Marie.
Marie.
Okay.
You can't mess it up.
Yeah, so I met her, again, a lot. I've not, number one, I haven't been the person who gets work because I go out there and hunt and find work because I'm stupid and I'm bad at that. At the same time, I'm also not someone who built up a huge following of consistently turning in, like monthly titles. Like I'm never going to get hired to do the Avengers or anything like that.
Hmm.
Having said that, there is a need in time for comics where editors are like, I have this weird ass story. I need any available idiot who can just take it and do something with it. And I'm the available idiot. So
Yeah.
I've gotten a lot of one shots and weird like off, which is great for me because there's also like they also when I don't get hired tons and I don't get hired usually for high profile stuff, but when I do get hired, editors kind of know what they're getting. And they're like, all
Hmm.
right, just that thing you do. And then there's like girls and like civilizations you make up and like fake corporate just do that stuff. Just do it.
Right.
We don't care.
We're looking at you, Prez.
Yeah, no one's gonna read this. Well, yeah, and so that she actually had Infinity Inc., which was a little two-parter, and it was set in the 80s. And so oh, and you know, because it had a lot of teen girls in it and or young, I guess like early 20s or whatever. And I gotta say something controversial. There are a lot of and it's changed, but for a long time there were a lot of artists out there who are really good at drawing men and not so
Hmm.
great at drawing ladies. The other people were really
Yeah.
good at drawing ladies, but the ladies tended to look, um, I don't know, I guess male gaze. I don't even know how to put it.
Yeah.
Um,
Artificial.
right, and just and I feel bad saying this because there are and have always been amazing artists who can draw amazing ladies. Having said that, you know that is something that is or was something that they were on the lookout for, and I had just come off of doing um, before Infinity Inc. was oh my god, it's Super Superboy Future's End, which
Okay.
had Roxy from Gen 13 had like a variety of and guys too, younger characters. They were teens, they're a little bit angsty, um, and I did that for DC, and she saw that and she liked that, and so that was a good fit for Infinity Inc. because they're these teen angsty-ish
Hmm.
characters, and that was fun for me because I got to sort of tap into the whole 80s. I was a little kid when the 80s happened. I wasn't paying attention to a lot of it. So, for me, the 80s are this weird, fascinating landscape of the familiar to me, but also like an anthropologist living in some tiny Malaysian village in the 60s as it's industrializing and kind of watching what's happening. So anyway, so that was fun to revisit. And that was with Marie, and she was great to work with. And I think she was amused by the fact that I really get into sort of this narrative visual language of, for example, in that case, it's in the 80s, how to really kind of make that work with the character. So I took each one of the Infinity Inc. characters and modeled them after a sort of 80s visual stereotype of like the new
Hmm.
wave guy with a skinny tie and then the jock and then, and then the Madonna like girl. Um,
Right.
so, or I guess really Cindy Lauper, because she probably anyway, so do like using sort of visual shorthand like that and trying to create a whole convincing world in short space. So I think she liked that, and again, liked the way I handled these younger angsty-ish characters for that. And so when Prez came along, Mark Russell obviously has won about 1 billion awards at this point, but
Hmm.
that was I think that was the first comic he did, which she recruited him for that and said,
Okay.
I think you got a future in comics. Why don't you do this comic? Um, so I think they picked me partly because I was available, probably at a great page rate too. Um, and also because it's a teen female president, and I could draw her so she'd be like pleasant and fun to look at without looking too objectified.
Right.
Um, at that point, I already in all my comics I was always creating fake corporations, fake logo advertising campaigns, things like that. My art's always got that little bit of satire. So I
Hmm.
think in that sense, I wouldn't say I was the best fit, but I was like a pretty obvious choice. And so she put me on Prez, and actually, I had a choice. It was either that or Batmite, um, which was
Mm.
which came out around the same
Yeah.
time and was ultra cartoony. And I decided, I already feel like I'm too pigeonholed with cartoony stuff, and I want to do something that's a little different and challenging. And so, yeah, Prez was great. I think 3 people read it, but the people who read it loved it. Um, I won an award. DC loved that. They sent me a little like fruit chocolate basket thing. That was pretty cool. That
Nice.
was I know that was great. So yeah. And yeah, when so Marie had me do a couple of other odds and ends. We were at a DC party with some friends, and she was mentioning that DC had access to all the Hanna-Barbera characters, and like what are we going to do with this and that, like what the heck are we going to do with the Banana Splits.
Hmm.
And so I said they should fight the Suicide Squad, and we all laughed because that's ridiculous. Who would ever do that? And then I think 2 months later I got a script for that, and I was like, oh, I guess that's the thing I'm drawing. So yeah, so she's always appreciated that absurdity. Um,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when we were doing this comic, Carrie Kelly, there was no particular editor attached. But I said,
Mhm.
hey, can we bring in Marie? She's good at the editing stuff. And yeah,
She's not busy either.
right. Well, at the time, she was, I think she might have been a group editor, but she was still sort of in the trenches. And then, yeah, I feel bad because she just every other week she gets promoted. So I think she's taken over Warner Brothers, like movie studio next week or something. I'm not sure. So yeah, I feel bad. Like, hey, Marie, I have some questions about this page, as if you don't mind. But no, she's been fantastic, fantastic to work with. So
I'm sure it's probably a really actually a relieving distraction from a lot of the stuff.
I think I might be.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not usually the questions I have for the problems I have for her are pretty bizarre ones, not the usual things that
They're
she probably has Zoom
they're not
meetings over.
people aren't gonna lose their jobs. So, like, a whole team isn't gonna disappear.
Right, right. If
Yeah.
Carrie has a new wave haircut as opposed to a goth haircut, it's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it was good, and Frank Miller's been great for this too because um so we had first we met at once it had been decided I was gonna work on this, we met at a Comic-Con um at a writing workshop, which was really cool. It was
Mhm.
he and Klaus Janson did a writing workshop on The Dark Knight Returns. And they started off, all right, page one, we did these panels, we did this, that, page two, and like going through every page. Unfortunately, at some point, someone asked a question or something. So then they started
Sure.
moving off of that. But like they could have honestly done that for all 200 pages.
Oh my god.
It would have been amazing. So we only got about 15 pages.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really fascinating. It was interesting. And then we had the break, a quick lunch break. And I went over to say hi to Slen, who was sort of his factotum, his manager. Um, and I'm like, oh, I'm Ben, the guy who's doing Carrie Kelly, the art. And she's like, oh, you don't look anything like I expected. And I was like, okay, cool. And then a few minutes later, she brought Frank Miller over. Like, oh, this is Ben. He's like, hi, how do you doing? She's like, yeah, he's the one who's doing Carrie Kelly with you. And he looked me up and down. He's like, really? You're not at all what I expected. So I'm not sure what they expected, but like it clearly failed. Um, but they were great. And then Frank and I started talking a little about the Battle of Thermopylae because we're both really interested in Greek history.
Sure.
Possibly have some different opinions about some of the elements of Greek history, but it's always fun to talk with him about that. Yeah,
Maybe they thought you were younger.
I think they. I mean, when you look at my art, I don't know if they were
Yeah.
expecting like a 23-year-old girl or something. Maybe not like a
Maybe.
cranky old like bald dude who still talks like it's the 1940s. So yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm glad that he stuck
Willikers.
with me. But no, it's
Yeah.
been great, and we had conversations. Um, like I like before anything else even started, we had a meeting where it was just, and it was very official. Marie was there, his whole crew was there.
Mhm.
I think there might have been actually a film crew. Jim Lee was there officiating. I'm not sure exactly outside of introducing us what his function was there because
Right.
he drew a page while we were talking, like a whole comic page, perfect. It was ridiculous. Just started in one corner and worked his way across, like so completely different from how I work. It was amazing. But yeah, but it was great because I had questions for Frank Miller, like, does this story take place within the 4-issue miniseries? Does it take place later? Is it still 20 years in the future? And
Mhm.
he's like, honestly, I don't give a damn. I just want it to be cool. I want Carrie Kelly to be cool. I want she's like a better version of Batman.
Mhm.
And I want you to see her do cool detective shit. And want to see her do cool ninja shit. And I want everyone to come out of this loving Carrie Kelly. And I don't care about any of the other stuff. And I was like, great, that's fantastic. That's what I love. And then we're talking, he loves Nancy Drew mysteries. That's where Carrie's name comes from. I love
Oh,
those
okay.
too. Three investigators. So yeah, so it was great. But he always, from the beginning, was always very, very positive about, this book, and not like he doesn't get hung up on some of the things that I think sometimes fans might get hung up with or expect him to, because I think he also, we were talking about Sin City at the time because I think the new Sin City Ultimate Edition had just come out, or the Ultra Ultimate Edition. I don't know. It
Mhm.
was the size of a paving stone. I don't remember what it was. And we were all gathered around looking at it and talking about some of the decisions he made. He's like, that one, honestly, I just wanted to do this thing to piss people off. I just wanted to see what happened. I don't know. So I suspect that probably might be true more often than not for a lot of the things he does in his projects. But no, with Carrie Kelly, he's always been very excited about just having it be its own thing and working, as its own story, which is great.
Right. I think that's cool. And touching on just that bit about, his impulses, I think that's very like, listen, man, people don't know what they want until they see something
Mm,
and they go, oh, I like this. So for someone like Frank or anybody, doesn't matter if you're Frank Miller, it could be just anybody who's making a thing. Make what you want. Make what makes you
yeah,
makes you happy, gets you excited, scares you, whatever the thing is. Because when someone does engage with it, that's when they're going to go, "Oh, I really like this.
right,
This is what I want." Because otherwise, it's just going to be like, "Well, this is sort of like what I know I like," and then that's not really ever going to win you any, love and attention. It's just
right.
going to keep you, gainfully employed, maybe.
And the trick with that is, you can do that and you can do something amazing and it still might not catch on. But having
Sure.
said that, it's all a crapshoot anyway. So at least that way you fucked up doing something you're excited about, as opposed to guessing, oh, people want to see this. And I mean, Hollywood still hasn't learned that lesson, but um,
No,
you can follow
no.
a formula and still fail. So you're taking a chance either way. If there was an algorithm or if there was a formula that worked, they would just press the button every time and get that and succeed. And considering the amount of money that's involved, and clearly that has not happened yet. So it's the
Yeah.
same with anything creative. You do have to, and I'm not sure I'm there yet emotionally. I'm trying to get to that point, but I'm always second guessing myself. Um, it's really been a hang up for my work. And it's funny when people say, oh, you know, they think that something I did is really bold and inventive and so on. And sometimes I agree, but there are a lot of times where I'm like, I really was trying for something much more, but I kind of chickened out. And
Mm.
so yeah, it's definitely something I really appreciate seeing that in Frank Miller, for example, because that's something that I definitely struggle with.
Well, I guess I mean the nice thing is that it sort of emboldens you on a level to push a little further because there's someone there who wants to push and
Right.
who has your back. Not to mention not even on the editorial side, like you're not gonna fail by trying really, really hard
Right.
here.
I mean, and I've said it's another great thing with him is we're very different people and we have a lot of very different impulses and so on. But having said that, The Dark Knight really was something that was massively, insanely influential on me. And
Mhm,
again, a lot of the reasons for that are not the reasons I think that a lot of people associate with The Dark Knight or Frank Miller. Uh, but he, I don't want to speak for him, but again, he's owned that when we talk about it. There's like how bizarre and silly it is. There's like these flying dolls that they might be robots, they might be human because they talk and cuss and you don't really know, but they also explode. You know,
mhm.
it's weird, so fucking weird, in the best way.
Yeah.
Superman, like, how does he get his strength again? You can try and come up with like explanations for that stuff, or you can just let it flow over you like this bombastic, operatic, modern myth building. And so it's been nice working with him and indulging. I don't know if indulging quite a word, but like being able to play with those things that it's kind of like Nixon going to China. If you're working with Frank Miller and you do those sillier, weirder things, you can do it because it's Frank Miller and people are like, all right, that's cool. Whereas if I
Mhm.
did that stuff on my own, people would be like, why is this so silly? There's a different level of respectability that he's earned that I haven't. So you can do
Sure.
those crazy, silly things. And it was also fun amplifying certain things about that world. I know one thing he loved is, the arcade is a linchpin of the original story, in that's where Carrie Kelly almost gets killed with her friend,
Mhm,
and Batman comes in and saves her. And obviously, that's her origin story that comes up in the story we did a lot, not just as this plot point in her life, but also looking at what does it mean, and especially and all this was built off of just what's there in a handful of pages in the original. But she's gone on proactively. Well, I don't want to be a victim again. I'm going to be a hero, and it's amazing how she is like, I'm going to save up my lunch money that I saved from my negligent parents and rent
mhm.
out a Robin costume, and I'm going to slowly figure out. Okay, I took gymnastics for a while. I'm going to teach myself how to jump from building to building and climb pipes, and all of these she's very methodical and practical about it,
Hmm.
and she's the one who hunts down Batman, and when he's in trouble, she saves his life. And so there's that positive element of her where, this comes out of trauma, but where she's proactive about it. But then again, she's a 13, 14-year-old girl. This thing happened to her and to her best friend, and there's no real escaping that. I mean, it's not a dark story, it's not a bleak story, but there is that reality, tapping into the reality of what does it actually mean for someone,
Hmm.
um, who's got to navigate not just the fun parts, the cool parts of, oh, now I'm a ninja and hang out with Batman, which is fun, but also, how honest are you going to be about what happened and where you are now and so on, and how does it affect your
Yeah.
relationship with others? Um, yeah, and but yeah, so the arcade, just the fun of actually like building up, and I went into 3D models and stuff because I'm insane, and actually built up the arcade, and it looms very large in the story, visually and thematically, and really having fun with just Carrie's corner of Gotham,
Hmm.
and how it's this bizarre, almost like a theatrical stage, or almost like a video game stage with all these different like levels to play on, and different hyper psychological neighborhoods, in terms of the cartoony idea of not just,
Hmm.
oh, there's a bunch of buildings, but each neighborhood feels like, I mean, this is a weird way to put it, but each neighborhood feels like its own video game level, or its
That's
own
cool.
stage opera, with its own visual elements and its own emotional connotations for the characters, all that sort of stuff.
Like a whole new set gets flied in every time you go to the
Yes,
neighborhood. I like that.
exactly. And lots of gangs.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's Gotham. The
Exactly.
There's this interesting thing that happens in a career if you're fortunate and you get to work with either heroes or luminaries. And it's a very strange moment because when you're in it, from my experience, I didn't have the time and I didn't allow myself the luxury of like, flipping out or being
Yep.
super excited about it because I'm just like, okay, this is it. Like, so Keith Giffen is just this guy who's writing the book, and I'm just going to be drawing this book from this guy who happens, to send me the script via sketches.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, okay, this is how this book is being done. I'll take it from here. Um, but I mean, have you allowed yourself any moment of going like, holy shit,
Oh, sure.
or yeah, okay,
I mean, there's only so much of that. I mean, like I was saying with that earlier, his page by page breakdown of the Dark Knight. Like, I would love to just be able to corner and be like, all right, you got to page 14. Let's do the
keep
rest.
going.
Tell me the rest right now. Here's like a slide projector. I'll wait. Um,
Yep.
but the projection screen. But and I have asked him various questions. I mean, some of it also is because teasing out like what he thinks is important and so on, and like how I can really communicate that,
Hmm.
because no one's buying this because Ben Caldwell's name's on the cover. I think we can all agree on that. And really, wanting him to be happy, and like it's really what I'm drawing, what I'm presenting is what he wants, what he's excited about.
Yeah.
But it's also there's only so much that I can do, because we do have to uh, get work done. And he's a busy guy. He's usually
Hmm.
flying off to convention, or he's got a film crew or whatever. Um, but yeah, we used to spend a couple hours, and there's a lot of shooting the shit about all sorts of stuff. He's interested in so many things, and knows a million things about comics and the industry, um, and about pop culture that I have no idea, because I'm not smart. But
Well,
he's great to work with. It's also fun, but also a little surreal sometimes when I look at a page and be like, oh, I love this so much. I was like, thank you. But then it gets awkward because, on occasion he'll be like, I love this page. It's great. And I'm like, thank you. But I think we need to kill this page because it's not really doing what it needs to do. And, you got
mm,
limited space. It's like, but I love this page. I'm like, thank you. I love it too. I drew it, but I don't know if it's, and then I have to be the ruthless one, because when he sees these pages, he's enjoying, which, I mean, again, like,
mhm.
that's not a complaint. That's amazing. It's something I never expected to happen, but to see him enjoying them and having that fun of seeing them, and then sometimes me having to be the mean person who's like no, but I also have the luxury because it's mine, so I can be as mean about myself as I want. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
The So who else is on the creative team for this project?
I don't understand the question. Just
I
us.
mean,
It's just us.
so you're handling the lettering, or is he handling the
Oh,
lettering?
oh, I'm
Like,
sorry. No, no, no. That is not correct. John Workman is doing the lettering.
oh,
I
okay,
did a lot of
awesome,
hand lettering for effects and stuff, but John Workman is lettering.
sweet. That's a good grab.
It is, yes. That was very, very cool that that worked out as well as did. Yeah, and I've been doing the inks and the colors, and Marie's stuck with editing.
Yeah.
Can't escape. So yeah.
I think it's that's great. I mean, and I think it's wonderful when you can really pare down a creative endeavor at times because it allows a lot of people get to do some interesting different lifting. I mean, it
Right.
sounds even you're lifting a few corners of this box, but
Yeah.
it's
I mean, it
still
doesn't make things go
it's
faster, but yeah.
what are you talking about? You're almost done.
I am. I thankfully, but yeah, it's definitely been a ride. Um
Is John lettering on your pages or is it after the fact?
he's he gets the digital files, the digital ink
Okay,
files. Um yeah. And so he's working off those. Um and yeah, and he came up with a new, like, his own specific dialogue treatment, like bubbles and everything like that. So it's great. It's great.
sweet.
Like, cool, you do that because I don't know what I would do. So that's great.
So process based, I want to get back to this. So like when I was in my last couple of years, or let's say my last year really being a penciler, I remember complaining. Dave Johnson and I were complaining together about how we weren't thrilled with what we were doing at the time
Sure.
as to what we were when we were 10 years before. We were like, we just sat down and we just drew on the page,
Right.
and we just and there's a level of spontaneity that happened in those pages that we felt we weren't recreating to some degree. And I thought about it over the years, and I'm thinking a lot of it had to do is that I would draw as well on copy paper, and then I would light box that through
Hmm.
to have a nice finished pencil, look. And I wonder if I was adding steps into the process, which sort of degraded what might have been the
Right.
explosiveness or what. And
I mean, there's always a trade-off with that. And for this one, which I've done in the past too, I knew I was inking myself, so I tried to
yeah,
keep the pencils pretty loose, um, so I can make decisions with inks. And a lot of cases that work. There are cases where I did need to. I had went back in and did more tight pencils because sometimes you need that information to be
hmm
exactly in the right place, the right lines and everything on the pencils for the ink. So kind of a little bit of both. Um, but yeah, I mean, I that too, where there are, especially when it's hundreds of pages graphic novel, you get to later parts and you're looking back at some of the earlier parts when you were just figuring out certain things, like characters' hairstyles or proportions, or some of the visual rhythm. And and again, I actually try and plan a lot of that ahead of time, very, very extensively. It's almost like I'm a one-person animation studio where I'll do turns and I'll do
hmm
expression sheets. I figured out like Carrie's wardrobe and did research for that, all that sort of stuff. But having said that, in the heat of drawing, like the spontaneity is good, but at the same time, also when you're in a rush, sometimes you can revert. And so there were certain things I wanted to do, like certain angles I wanted to push, or certain treatments where I either didn't do it in the grind of getting pages done, or later in the
hmm
book I look back at some of the earlier pages and like, oh, that's really rough, and and I don't have the luxury of redoing them all from scratch. I
yeah,
think I'd be physically restrained. But there are definitely places where I'm like, I'm just gonna fix that here, or this weird, wonky like design for a character. Um,
yeah,
so yeah, there's always this trade off between wanting to do it and just move forward and trying to
hmm
keep a certain level of consistency and quality, or a different type of quality, technical quality, as opposed to just the pure experience. I mean, one of the things for me that's kind of unnerving is how Frank has said, and I feel like I talked with Klaus Janson too, and he said the same thing. How they just were like, how can we get pages out as quickly as possible and like not think about them? It's like,
mm.
man, that sounds amazing. I don't know how the fuck you did that. I would love to. So I'm gonna be honest with you. I've been thinking about some post Carrie Kelly projects, and I think I might try and do one or two that are just pure. Is it the word? Where it's like, I have stories, I have characters, but just I'm gonna make it
hmm
to see what happens, and I'm not even expecting it to be good, just doing something and really not thinking because I'm in this in between sort of place where I think too much about some things and not enough about others
Hmm.
and have to commit one way or the other.
That might be a tool change kind of thing. If you
It
can.
might be. I've been experimenting with a lot of digital pens. It's funny how
Hmm.
even that can make a difference because um, for the inking for this one, I switched to a different program, um,
Which one?
Clip Studio. So I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I think it's the. I love you, Kyle. But Clip Studio is still my favorite inking
well, I love the
software.
problem I had is I love his brushes and I use them. It's just I was having
Hmm.
Photoshop issues, not Kyle issues,
Yeah.
and so I had to switch to Clip.
Same with him.
Yes, in the end, same with him, and and also, like, I just didn't have the energy to really figure out Clip Studio. I figured out enough to just use it. So
Same,
I've just been
same.
using one. I think it's the is it the Onion pen? Using one
Okay.
pen, which
Yep.
is really good for clean, clear, like clarity of line and shape. But it's a little
Hmm.
bit. It can be too clean, but I want that. So I'm never quite satisfied. So I've been using
Yeah.
that. Although I also I figured out a way I could go back to using some Kyle brushes on Photoshop on a different computer. So, and also messing with more of the clip brushes. So I've started, for example, one of the characters. I almost said his name. Oops. One of the characters I inked with a different pen to get a different feel for him. Um, so trying to play with that a little. Um, but it's also I wonder how that cleanliness affects me because for another one of my projects, I put together a bunch of art for a pitch at one point, and I used actually a bunch of Kyle brushes, and they were pens that were kind of wonky and all over the place, and you couldn't get it just right. But it was great because the inks I did for those, it was just because you couldn't get it exactly right, you didn't try to, and just put the information
Hmm.
down. And those did have that energy and life to them, where each line might not be exactly where I wanted, but again, as I was saying before about individual pages or even individual projects, the overall effect was what really counted. And looking at, in the moment, I'm sure I was like, oh, this line isn't exactly where I wanted, or how could that shape have been better? But looking at those again years later, you don't see that. You just see, oh, this character looks great. Or I mean, I'm sure the vast majority of artists or comic artists, you see the same thing when you look at other people's artwork. You're just experiencing it, enjoying it for its overall quality, its overall emotive impact,
Hmm.
aesthetic impact. Whereas the artists themselves might have noticed things. I remember at one point, this is really random, but there's an issue of Bone where the grandma had her arm on her, her hand on her hip, and her arm was at this weird angle. Where I was looking at, I'm like, ooh, I would have fixed that. But then I was like, that's also like one pen out of millions, and I've read this a million times, and this is the first time I'm even thinking that. So it's
Right.
not really like there's nothing wrong with the elbow. It's just the sort of thing that an artist themselves, looking at their own work,
Hmm.
might overthink, but it's completely irrelevant to the overall quality and the overall impact.
Yeah.
So yeah, that struggle, I've got that with every part of what I'm doing, but yeah, with inking and lines, that's definitely something I noticed a lot.
It's so interesting in this day and age that what I'm finding the predominant model, people are doing digital pencils and then they're inking
Yes,
traditionally so they can sell the pages, and you're
right,
going the opposite route.
right. Well, I'm also in the position. Again, I wouldn't recommend this as a financially viable path, but I just like drawing with my pencils. And
Hmm.
also, I know you can use a tablet or you can use Wacom and so on, so you can turn it. But I like to physically be turning the paper, like my
Hmm.
fingers are getting in it and smearing it. And I could learn in different ways. I mean, and I learned Photoshop in college. I've been using it. I've been using digital programs, the 3D modeling programs. So I'm certainly not averse to new technology, but that's something where I get certain results that I don't have to think about, relatively speaking. It's going from my brain onto the paper with a certain um, directness and bluntness that
Yeah.
if I was thinking, and I've had that happen because I've tried using um, programs and using pads to do various effects and things, and that works in some ways, but in others it does. It, like you said, it's an extra step. It's a filter
Hmm.
between what's in my brain getting pushed out of my brain, what's ending up in the final work on screen or on paper. So yeah, I draw first. I also like this book will probably have about 1,000 pages of original art
Mm.
because I will, sometimes there'll be a page where it's like, oh, it's beautiful. All the panels, like it looks respectable. A lot of them are not like that. And,
Yeah.
I'll draw I'll draw two of the panels, and that second one, oh, the face, she's sneering, but she's sneering in an angry way, and I want her to sneer more in an uncertain way. Because again, I'm
Hmm.
psycho, and I don't know if anybody else will even notice that. But so then the rest of the page is just 4 or 5 versions of that sneer, trying to get it just right, or trying to redraw a hand. Not even the technical draftsmanship, but try and sell a certain emotion or whatever. Um, and I'm always disappointed by my inability to get those things right, but I try. And so there are tons of pages like that where I'm sure any actual collector or dealer would be like, what the hell am I supposed to do with
Do with this.
page 194A version 2 edit. I write in the corner of my pages the same way people save their Photoshop files, where
Right.
it's got like 18 suffixes. So and then also, I can also, as anybody else, I can see something new. Like I just rewatched Rear Window. I love how they told this particular part of the story visually and have the camera bounce
Hmm.
from this character to the other. Looking at this one scene I did the other week, it was okay, but could I do something like that in there? And so there's things like that too, which make me want to kind of redraw. And again, I have to be judicious about what sort of time I have to do that. And there are a
Yeah.
lot of cases, the majority of cases, I'm like, you know what, shut up, Ben. But or maybe there'll be a master edition years from now that you can do that. But a lot of it I have to let go. But there are occasions where I go back.
You're good. You have plenty of workup material to put into that master
Oh
edition.
my god, that's thousands of pages, and that doesn't even include all the designs for characters and stuff. And again, like
Yeah,
I got to play with making up imaginary corporations and logos, and
of course.
yeah, there's a Corto malt beer. I like that. So yeah,
I love it when people who I dig get to do things, with a relative, blank check.
right.
Like
There was a lot of
create,
support on this
go,
one. Yeah,
yeah, and it's not common, and it's I mean, the only
no,
people who get no, it's not. So and I'm super pumped the fact that this is happening because I'm like, okay, like I know what you do, and I'm like, okay, well, he's gonna like really push himself on this thing, and it's gonna be a really unique experience. So
I gotta say it's both very very Frank Miller, and it's also very very Ben Caldwell. If you've seen any of my other stuff,
yeah,
when you open up, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, I get it. Um,
this is
but yeah,
synthesis.
but I've had a lot of fun, like, and I have been playing with like the color language and treatment, and there's neon signs everywhere and noir, and really
Mm,
building up these sets. Not so much in terms of realism. That's, I don't know. I'm not sure
yeah.
how realism works, but this visceral quality, this tactile
Hmm.
quality, this immersive quality to everything, where each part of the city is its own character, and really having fun playing with that. And again, like coming up with all sorts of insane gangs and like weird, crazy T-shirts, and just, I don't know, all of the. I'm basically like a little kid who played with toys, and I'd make up all the backgrounds and everything for it. And now I'm doing the
Yeah,
same thing, only it's on paper. So
totally,
there's
dude.
something so fun about that. So
That was the. I mean, I think that's the reason I got into comics outside of just loving them. With a limited budget, I'm like, well, how do I make this story continue?
yeah,
I guess I'll carry it on. I'll customize my toys, make them look like the characters, and keep on going.
right.
And or I'll draw this thing, like whatever it is. So
Yeah, a lot of like growing up, a lot of coming up with stories was really just me having to entertain myself. Like a lot of
yeah,
benign neglect, lack of funds, and like I guess I'm just gonna make up my own sci-fi thing. There's like literally no
totally.
one stopping me. So yeah. So being able to do it the way I do now, like I can't say I've had a clear path career wise or made the most of it, but what I have done, it's been a lot of fun.
Well, I appreciate it, and
Thank
I'm
you.
sure there's plenty of others who do. Um, where can people find you if you were so kind as to
Sure.
put something
Well,
up online?
for now, I'm still on social media, on Twitter,
Hmm.
and I think on all of Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as just Ben Caldwell Art, or at Ben Caldwell Art.
Hmm.
Um, that's it for now. I'm putting together stuff to set up a new website, possibly a Patreon, because of course I also had this whole second life before this of doing how to draw books, and I would teach
Yes,
classes on how to cartoon, and I've been doing more of that since then, just kind of keeping it to myself because I have to kind of teach myself how to do a bunch of things I want to do, and think them through. So I'm gonna put put together sort of a platform of all of that material in one place so people can,
Patreon might be perfect for
yeah,
that.
and like try and
Yeah.
keep a lot of things freely available, but also um, have one place people can come and see all that stuff. And also like there are a lot of creators who have had a very clear path career wise where they've always worked on monthly comics or whatever. So it's or their own creator projects they've always worked on, so what you're getting and everything. With
Mhm.
me, I've done something here, I did something there, I did this other thing in a different place. So it's very easy to have no idea what I'm up to, even if you do like my
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah,
Right on.
that's the next thing.
Well,
And a nap.
that's always a thing.
When I'm done with this,
Yes,
definitely a nap.
a nap, a
Yes.
nice, comfortable nap. I'll put all the links in the show notes so people can just click on them and
Fantastic.
find you where they want to. And any conventions for the rest of the year?
I will be at New York
Okay.
and in October, and that's it because honestly my focus will be on doing pages.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, it's on the calendar for me, so maybe I'll see you up there.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah, man.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks Alex. Take it easy.